Have you ever met someone and felt like you've been waiting for them your whole life, even though you didn't know they existed? The question hung in the air like morning mist over the Pacific, unanswered and unanswerable. Silas Chen stood at the edge of Cannon Beach, his sneakers sinking slightly into the wet sand, watching the sun break through the Oregon coast's perpetual gray. In his hands, he held a small wooden box worn smooth at the edges from 3 months of constant handling. He'd driven 6 hours from Seattle to get here to this specific beach because his mother had loved it, had spoken about it in those final weeks when speaking became difficult, when every word cost her something precious. "Take me back there," she'd whispered, though they both knew she'd never make the journey. "Promise me you'll go." And so here he was, 22 years old, freshly graduated with a degree in architecture. He wasn't sure he wanted any more, standing at the edge of the continent with a box full of letters he couldn't bring himself to read. The box felt heavier in his hands. He'd meant to scatter the ashes of these words into the ocean, let them dissolve like his mother's body had dissolved into smoke and memory 6 months ago. But his fingers wouldn't loosen. His arms wouldn't extend. "The light's perfect right now." Silas startled, nearly dropping the box. He turned to find a young man standing a few yards away, camera rays pointed not at the sunrise but at Silas himself, at the exact moment of his private grief frozen in a stranger's viewfinder. "I'm sorry," the stranger said, immediately lowering the camera. "I didn't mean to intrude. I'm a photographer. Sometimes I shoot first and think later." He had the kind of face that belonged in California rather than Oregon, all sunshine and easy smiles, golden hair that caught the morning light. "I can delete it if you want." Silas should have been angry, should have told this intrusive stranger to mind his own business, to take his camera and his California smile somewhere else. But something in the man's eyes stopped him, a flicker of recognition though they'd never met, a sense of understanding that had no basis in logic. "It's fine," Silas heard himself say. The words came out rough, unused. He'd barely spoken to anyone in days. The stranger smiled, smaller, this time more genuine. "I'm Declan. Declan Foster." "Silas." They stood there as the tide crept in, two strangers watching the sun climb higher, saying nothing because there was everything to say and no words adequate enough to say it. The hostel in downtown Portland smelled like stale coffee and the dreams of 100 transient souls. Silas checked in at the desk, paid for 3 nights, though he'd probably leave in 2, and climbed the narrow stairs to his shared room. His backpack held everything he owned and that mattered now. Some clothes, his laptop, a sketchbook he hadn't opened since his mother's diagnosis, and the wooden box. He was unpacking when Declan walked in. "Oh," they said simultaneously, then laughed. The sound felt foreign to Silas, like a language he had forgotten how to speak. "Small world," Declan said, tossing his own bag onto the opposite bunk. Or maybe just a small hostel. Maybe both. Over the next 2 days, they orbited each other in the casual way of hostile strangers. Shared the bathroom, nodded hello over breakfast, occasionally exchanged recommendations about Portland's coffee shops or bookstores. Declan was always leaving with his camera, always coming back with stories about the shots he'd captured: a homeless man feeding pigeons, a bride crying outside a courthouse, a child's balloon caught in telephone wires. "You see the world differently," Silas observed one evening when they found themselves alone in the common room. Rain drummed against the windows. Most of the other travelers had gone out to brave Portland's breweries and food trucks. "I see what's there," Declan replied, scrolling through his camera's display. "Most people look without seeing. They're so focused on where they're going that they miss where they are." "And where are you going?" Declan's thumb paused on the scroll wheel. "Santa Fe. There's a photography collective there, an exhibition. I need to submit a portfolio." He looked up. "You, Santa Fe, actually. Weird coincidence." "What's in Santa Fe for you?" Silas hesitated. The truth felt too heavy to share with someone he barely knew, yet somehow easier than sharing it with people who knew him well. "An old friend, someone I need to see." "Weird coincidence," Declan echoed, but his smile suggested he didn't believe in coincidences at all. Silas's car died on the third morning. Not dramatically, no explosion or smoke or fireworks. It simply refused to start the engine, making a grinding sound that the hostel's manager confirmed was terminal. "You could get it towed," the manager said, wiping grease from his hands, "but fixing it will cost more than the car's worth." Better to sell it for parts and find another ride. Silas stood in the parking lot feeling the universe's cosmic jokes settle over him like a weighted blanket. Of course his car died. Of course this happened now, when he'd finally worked up the courage to keep moving. I'm heading to Santa Fe. He turned to find Declan leaning against a dusty Subaru Outback, vintage but well-maintained, decorated with a collection of national park stickers. I know you said that, Silas replied carefully, and you need to get to Santa Fe. I can figure something out. Rent a car maybe, or take a bus. Or, Declan said, pushing off the car, you could split gas with me. I'm leaving tomorrow morning. The offer's there if you want it. Silas should have said no, should have maintained the careful distance he'd cultivated between himself and the rest of the breathing world. Should have recognized this for what it was, an invitation to let someone in even temporarily. Okay, he said instead. Thank you. Declan's smile broke across his face like sunrise over the Pacific. Great, we leave at dawn. Pack light and prepare for the scenic route. I don't believe in highways if I can help it. That night, Silas lay in his bunk, staring at the ceiling, listening to Declan's breathing from the opposite bed. Steady, peaceful. He thought about the photograph Declan had taken on the beach himself, holding the box frozen in a moment of private agony. He wondered what Declan had seen through the lens, what story he'd constructed from a stranger's grief. The wooden box sat on the floor beside his bunk, his mother's letter still unread, still impossible to open. Tomorrow, he thought. Tomorrow he'd start moving again. Tomorrow he'd begin the long journey south toward Santa Fe, toward whatever waited there. And maybe, just maybe, toward something he hadn't expected to find. Dawn came soft and gray the way it always did in Portland. Silas loaded his bag into Declan's Subaru, noting the impressive collection of photography equipment carefully packed in the back, lenses, tripods, reflectors, a laptop for editing. You travel heavy, he observed. It's my livelihood, Declan replied, securing the last of his gear. Can't exactly leave it behind. What about your family, friends? Don't they worry about you driving across the country alone? Something flickered across Declan's face, too quick for Silas to identify. I needed some space. Time to think. You know how it is. Silas did know. He knew too well. They pulled out of Portland as the city yawned awake, heading south on 101 instead of I-5. The Pacific Coast Highway, Declan's choice, naturally. The slower route, the more beautiful one, the path that would add days to their journey. If you're in a hurry, Declan began. I'm not, Silas interrupted, and he realized it was true. Where was he rushing to anyway? Elena would be in Santa Fe whether he arrived in 3 days or 3 weeks. The box of letters would remain unread, whether he drove fast or slow. Time had already stolen what mattered most. They drove in silence for the first hour. Not uncomfortable silence, but the kind that suggested words were optional rather than necessary. Declan kept one hand on the wheel, the other occasionally reaching for his camera, when something caught his eye, a particular slant of light through the trees, a solitary house perched on a cliff, the curve of the road as it hugged the coastline. Around 10, they stopped at a pullout overlooking the ocean. Declan immediately grabbed his camera and disappeared down a trail. Silas stayed by the car, breathing in salt air, letting the wind pull tears from his eyes that had nothing to do with grief. When Declan returned 20 minutes later, he was humming something under his breath. He stopped when he saw Silas. You okay? Well, yeah. Silas cleared his throat. The wind. Declan nodded, accepting the lie for the kindness it was. There's a good diner about an hour south. Makes the best pie on the coast according to Yelp. You trust Yelp? I trust pie. They got back in the car. As Declan started the engine, he reached for his phone, then paused. Deliberately, almost ceremonially, he powered it off and tossed it into the glove box. What are you doing? Silas asked. Disconnecting. I need to disconnect for a while. Too many voices in my head that aren't my own. You know, he glanced at Silas. That okay with you? I mean, I have it if there's an emergency, but otherwise. It's okay, Silas said. More than okay. The idea of Declan shutting out the world, choosing to be present here in this car on this journey, it felt like a gift, though Silas couldn't articulate why. They drove on. The diner did indeed have good pie. Apple served warm with ice cream melting into the crust's flaky edges. They sat in a booth with cracked red vinyl, splitting a slice because neither was particularly hungry, and talked about nothing important. Favorite movies? Best concerts they'd attended? The peculiar architecture of small-town America. Did you always want to be an architect? Declan asked, scraping the last of the ice cream from the plate. Silas considered lying, considered offering the easy answer he'd given professors and interviewers and concerned relatives. But something about the way Declan asked, genuinely curious, not making conversation, made him tell the truth. No, I wanted to be a writer, actually. Or maybe a poet. Something completely impractical. He smiled without humor. My mother was thrilled when I chose architecture instead. She could tell people her son had a real career ahead of him. Was she right? I don't know. I got the degree, but I haven't applied for a single job, haven't even looked at job postings. Why not? Silas stared at the smear of apple pie on his fork. Because I spent 3 years of college not in class. I spent them in hospitals, in hospice, in my mother's room watching her disappear piece by piece. And when she finally died, I felt he stopped, horrified by what he'd almost confessed. Relieved, Declan supplied gently. Silas looked up sharply. How did you? Because that's what grief does. It exhausts you until you're relieved when it ends, and then you feel guilty for being relieved, which creates a whole new kind of grief. Declan's eyes held something ancient, something that suggested he understood this mathematics of loss. Who did you lose? Who did you lose? Silas countered. Declan smiled sadly. Touché. We're both running from something, aren't we? Or towards something. Maybe it's the same thing. They left the diner as afternoon light slanted golden through the coastal pines, got back on the road. Declan found a radio station playing classic rock, and they listened to Fleetwood Mac and Tom Petty and Springsteen singing about highways and loneliness and the American landscape of the heart. Around sunset, they pulled into a small motel called the Driftwood Inn. It looked exactly like its name, weathered, salt-worn, probably last renovated when Nixon was president. But it sat right on the beach, and the price was reasonable, and neither of them felt like driving another mile. 2 rooms, the desk clerk asked an elderly woman with kind eyes. Yeah, Silas said. Actually, Declan interrupted, how much for a double 2 beds? The clerk quoted a price $20 cheaper than separate rooms. Declan looked at Silas, eyebrows raised in question. They'd shared a hostel room, shared a car for 12 hours. What difference would one more room make? That works, Silas said. Their room smelled like ocean and old wood. 2 beds with matching floral bedspreads, a small bathroom with a shower that probably leaked a sliding glass door that opened onto the beach. It was perfect in its simplicity. I'm going to take a walk, Declan said, grabbing his camera. Catch the last light. You coming? I think I'll shower. Long day. Suit yourself. After Declan left, Silas stood under water that was never quite hot enough, letting it wash away the road's grit and exhaustion. He thought about relief and guilt, about the way Declan had understood without judgment, about how for the first time in 6 months, he'd admitted aloud what he'd barely admitted to himself. He was drying off when he heard something from the other room. At first, he thought Declan had returned, but the sound came again, a choked sob, muffled but unmistakable. Silas cracked the bathroom door open. The room was empty. The sound came from outside, from the beach. He dressed quickly and stepped onto the small patio. Sunset painted the sky in violent oranges and purples, a beauty almost aggressive in its intensity. And there, silhouetted against the water's edge, sat Declan with his face in his hands, shoulders shaking. Silas stood frozen. To go to him felt like an intrusion. To leave him felt like abandonment. So he did neither. He simply stood there, bearing witness to another person's private sorrow, holding space for pain that wasn't his own. After a few minutes, Declan stood, wiped his face, and walked back toward the room. He saw Silas standing there and stopped. Sorry, Declan said. I didn't mean for you to. Don't apologize. They looked at each other in the dying light, 2 strangers who understood each other in ways that shouldn't be possible after only 2 days. Want to get dinner? Silas asked. I saw a seafood place down the road. Yeah, Declan said, his voice rough. Yeah, that sounds good. They ate fried fish and drank local beer and talked about everything except what mattered. When they returned to the motel, they lay in their separate beds in comfortable darkness, listening to the ocean's eternal conversation with the shore. Silas woke sometime after midnight to find Declan standing by the sliding glass door, looking out at the moonlit water. Can't sleep, Silas asked quietly. Never could, not really. Declan turned. Sorry if I woke you. You didn't. I'm a light sleeper these days. Declan came back to his bed, sat on the edge. Can I ask you something? Sure. The box you were holding on the beach, the wooden one, what's in it? Silas's breath caught. Letters. My mother wrote them before she died. One for every week she thought I'd need her after she was gone. Have you read them? No. Why not? Because once I read them, they're over. There won't be anything left of her that I haven't already consumed. His voice cracked on the last word. I know that's stupid. They're just paper. But right now they're still hers, still full of her voice, and I'm not ready to use it all up. Declan nodded slowly. It's not stupid. They sat in silence for a moment. What were you crying about? Silas asked. On the beach. He expected Declan to deflect, to claim it was nothing or change the subject. Instead, Declan said, I'm 23 years old and I don't know who I am. I've been pretending for so long that I forgot I was pretending. And now I'm in this car on this road running away from a life I built that doesn't fit anymore. He laughed without humor. How's that for a first-day confession? Pretty good. Want to hear mine? Always. I'm relieved my mother is dead. Not because I didn't love her, I loved her more than anything, but because watching her die was killing me too, and at least now one of us gets to keep living. Silas felt tears on his face but made no move to wipe them. I'm a terrible son. No, Declan said firmly. You're an honest one. They talked until the sky began to lighten, sharing the stories they'd never told anyone else. Silas learned that Declan had spent 5 years with a girlfriend who'd shaped his life around her expectations, that he'd said yes to so many things he didn't want because it was easier than saying no. Declan learned that Silas had turned down Harvard to stay with his mother, that he'd given up his own dreams so completely he could no longer remember what they were. As dawn broke, Declan stood and walked to his bag. He rummaged for a moment, then returned with something in his hand. I know this might seem weird, he said, but I want you to have this. He placed a folded piece of paper on Silas's bed. When Silas unfolded it, he found a photograph himself on Cannon Beach holding the wooden box, the sunrise breaking behind him. But it wasn't the image of grief Silas expected. In Declan's lens, he looked like someone searching. Someone at the beginning of a journey rather than the end of one. You saw that? Silas asked, voice thick. I see you, but Declan replied. The next morning they left the Driftwood Inn and continued south. But something had shifted between them, a recalibration of the distance strangers are meant to maintain. As they drove, Declan told stories about the people he'd photographed, the moments he'd captured. Silas found himself describing buildings he wanted to design, impossible structures of glass and light spaces that encourage people to be their truest selves. Why don't you, Declan asked, design them, I mean? Because I'm not sure I know what a true self looks like anymore. Then maybe that's what this trip is about. Finding out. They stopped at a roadside viewpoint where the highway curved impossibly around a cliff face. Declan set up his tripod while Silas leaned against the guardrail, watching the Pacific surge and retreat hundreds of feet below. I used to think I was afraid of heights, Silas said. But I'm not. I'm afraid of falling. What's the difference? Heights are neutral. They just exist. But falling is active. It's what happens when you let go. Declan lowered his camera. What if letting go is the point? Before Silas could answer, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out to find a text from Elena, his friend in Santa Fe, still planning to visit and have so much to tell you. Your friend? Declan asked, noticing Silas's expression. Yeah, Elena. We grew up together, lived next door to each other until I was 12 and my family moved to Seattle. We've kept in touch, but he trailed off. She's a counselor now. Specializes in grief and loss. Is that why you're going to see her? Maybe, partly. She's been asking me to visit for a year since before my mom died. I kept making excuses. Silas pocketed his phone. I think I was afraid she'd see right through me. Professional hazard and all. Would that be so terrible being seen? Silas looked at Declan. This man he'd known for 4 days who'd somehow become the person he'd shared his deepest truths with. I used to think so. Now I'm not sure. They got back in the car. The radio played Joni Mitchell singing about rivers and roads and going home. Declan hummed along, fingers tapping the steering wheel. Silas watched the California coastline scroll past the window and felt something he hadn't felt in years: anticipation. Not dread, not grief, not the bone-deep weariness that had become his default state, but genuine curiosity about what came next. "Can I tell you something weird?" Declan said, after a long stretch of comfortable silence. "Please." "I'm glad your car broke down." Silas laughed, a real laugh, the kind that started in his chest and bubbled up unexpected. "That is weird, but I think I am too." "Yeah, yeah." That night they camped in a state park near Big Sur. Declan had packed a tent and sleeping bags, knew how to build a fire that actually stayed lit. They cooked hot dogs on sticks like children and drank cheap wine from the bottle. Above them, stars emerged in formations Silas could almost remember from a childhood astronomy phase. "There's Cassiopeia," he said, pointing. "The vain queen condemned to circle the sky forever." "Sounds lonely." "I think it might be peaceful, knowing exactly where you are, what you are meant to do. No questions, no doubts, just the eternal rotation." "You don't believe that?" "No," Silas admitted. "I don't, but it sounds nice." The fire crackled. An owl called from the darkness of the pines. Declan threw another log onto the flames, sending sparks spiraling upward like inverse shooting stars. "Tell me about a building you'd design," Declan said. "If you could design anything, no limitations, no practical concerns." "What would you make?" Silas thought for a long moment. "A library, but not the kind with straight shelves and fluorescent lights. I'd make it circular with the books spiraling up toward a glass ceiling. Natural light all day. And in the center, there'd be a reading room that was also a garden. Indoor trees, a fountain, comfortable chairs scattered around. A place where stories and growing things coexist." "That sounds beautiful." "It's impractical. The maintenance costs alone." "I didn't ask if it was practical. I asked what you'd design." Silas smiled. "You're good at that." "At what?" "Asking the right questions." "I'm a photographer. Questions are how I see. Why this angle instead of that one? Why this moment and not the one before or after?" Declan poked the fire with a stick. "Most people think photography is about capturing what's there, but it's really about revealing what was always there but overlooked." "Is that what you're doing on this trip?" "Maybe, or maybe I'm just running away from questions I don't want to answer." "Such as?" Declan was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible over the fire's crackling. "Such as who I am when no one's watching. What I want versus what I think I should want. Whether I've been living my life or performing someone else's idea of what my life should look like." "And have you figured it out yet?" "I'm getting closer. Being out here away from everything, it's like I'm remembering something I forgot, or maybe learning something I never knew." They let the fire burn down to embers, crawled into the tent in their separate sleeping bags. But in the darkness, Silas heard Declan's breathing shift, become uneven. "Declan, yeah, thank you." "For what?" "For this, for sharing the drive, for not making me explain things I can't explain, for asking questions that don't have easy answers. You don't have to thank me for basic human decency. You'd be surprised." Outside the tent, the owl called again, hunting in the darkness. Silas closed his eyes and for the first time in months fell asleep without thinking about death. Morning arrived with a bird song and the smell of pine needles baking in early sun. They broke camp efficiently, two people learning each other's rhythms. Declan made instant coffee with a tiny camping stove. Silas rolled sleeping bags with the precision of someone who'd done it 1,000 times, though he couldn't remember when. "You camp much?" Declan asked, noticing the practice movements. "Used to. My dad and I would go backpacking every summer when I was a kid, before he left." "He left when I was 14. Decided a wife with cancer and a teenage son wasn't the life he'd signed up for." Silas said it matter-of-factly, a wound so old it had scarred over thick and numb. "Haven't heard from him since." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. Some people aren't built for staying. Better to learn that early than late." They packed the car in silence, but it wasn't the comfortable quiet of before. Something had curdled between them, some unspoken understanding that there were wounds even honesty couldn't touch. As they pulled back onto Highway 1, Declan said, "For the record, I'm not going anywhere." You don't have to say that. I know, but I want to. The highway curved along cliff edges that made Silas's heart race despite his claim to not fear heights. Below them, the Pacific churned against rocks that had been taking its abuse for millions of years. He thought about endurance, about what it meant to stand in place while the world threw everything it had at you. Around noon, they stopped in a small town whose name Silas immediately forgot, grabbed sandwiches from a deli that looked like it had been there since before fast food chains existed, ate sitting on a bench overlooking a marina where fishing boats rocked gently in their slips. I need to tell you something, Declan said, not looking at Silas. Silas's stomach tightened. Here it comes, he thought. The revelation that this had all been too good to be true, that Declan was married or a criminal or about to turn back and drive home. I'm not good at being honest, Declan continued. I'm good at showing people what they want to see. It's why I'm a decent photographer. I understand angles, framing, how to present something in its best light. But actually being honest, actually letting people see the unedited version. He finally looked at Silas. It scares me. Why are you telling me this? Because I don't want to perform for you. And that's new for me. Usually I can't help it. Silas took a bite of his sandwich, chewing slowly while he thought. So don't perform. Be whoever you are without the angle or the frame. I promise not to judge the raw footage. What if the raw footage isn't interesting? What if it is? They finished their sandwiches in silence. As they walked back to the car, Silas's phone buzzed again. Another text from Elena. I know you're on your way. Drive safe, take your time. I'll be here whenever you arrive. She sounds patient, Declan observed, glancing at the phone screen. She's a counselor. Patience is kind of her thing. Silas pocketed the phone. I'm dreading seeing her, to be honest. Why? Because she'll ask me how I'm doing, and she'll actually want to know. Not the polite version, the real answer. And I don't know if I'm ready to give that yet. Maybe you don't have to be ready. Maybe you just have to be honest. Says the man who just admitted he's terrible at honesty. Which is why I'm giving advice. Do as I say, not as I do. They drove into the afternoon, following the coastline as it gradually straightened and softened. The dramatic cliffs gave way to gentler hills. The wild Pacific mellowed into something almost Mediterranean. They passed through towns with Spanish names and missions that predated the United States itself. Around sunset, they reached San Luis Obispo. Found up a motel nicer than the Driftwood Inn, but still firmly in budget territory. This time, they didn't even discuss separate rooms. Just took the double without comment. After checking in, they walked downtown and found a small Italian restaurant with red checkered tablecloths and wine bottles covered in wax drippings. The kind of place that had been family-owned for 3 generations and would be for 3 more. To road trips, Declan said, raising his glass of cheap Chianti. To broken-down cars, Silas replied, clinking glasses. To taking the long way. To ending up where we need to be. They ordered too much food and ate until they were pleasantly stuffed, trading bites of pasta and stories about their lives before this trip. Declan told Silas about growing up in Orange County, about parents who divorced when he was 10 and remarried when he was 12, creating a blended family that never quite blended. Silas told Declan about Seattle's rain, about learning to find beauty in gray skies and the smell of wet pavement. Do you miss it? Declan asked. Seattle. Parts of it. My apartment, maybe. The coffee shops I used to study in. But mostly no. There's too much there that reminds me of, he trailed off, of your mom. Yeah, every street corner is a memory. Every park bench is somewhere we sat together. I couldn't drive 3 blocks without passing the pharmacy where I picked up her prescriptions, or the hospital where she had chemo, or the hospice facility where he stopped, blinking hard. I'm sorry, this is depressing dinner conversation. Don't apologize, I asked. Still, we should talk about something else. Like what? Like what you're going to photograph when we get to Santa Fe. Declan's face lit up the way it always did when the conversation turned to his work. Everything. The architecture, the light, the way the desert sky makes you feel small. I want to capture what it means to be in a landscape that's been there for millions of years where humans are just passing through. That's what you've been photographing this whole trip, and isn't it, impermanence? Moments that only exist because you caught them. Maybe, or maybe I'm photographing the opposite. The things that endure despite change. The ocean keeps moving, but the cliffs remain. People die, but their stories persist. He looked at Silas intently. Like those letters from your mom. They're permanent now in a way she couldn't be. Silas felt something crack open in his chest. I need to read them. Do you? I think so. Not yet, maybe, but soon. They walked back to the motel through streets quiet and nearly empty, a college town in summer hibernation. Silas found himself walking closer to Declan than strictly necessary, their shoulders occasionally brushing. Each contact felt electric, charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. That night, lying in the darkness with Declan in the next bed, Silas admitted what he'd been carefully not admitting for days. Declan, yeah, I'm glad we're doing this trip, together. A pause, then me too. Even though we barely know each other. Maybe that's why. No expectations, no history, just two people on a road figuring it out as they go. Is that what we're doing, figuring it out? I hope so. Silas turned over facing Declan's bed in the darkness. He could just make out the other man's silhouette, the rise and fall of his breathing. Good night, Declan. Good night, Silas. But neither of them slept for a long time, both aware of the other's wakefulness, both wondering what came next. They left San Luis Obispo as the morning fog burned off, revealing a California sky so blue it looked artificial. Declan drove with one hand, the other resting on the window frame, fingers drumming to a song only he could hear. Silas watched the landscape change from coastal green to golden brown, the earth drying out as they moved inland. We should talk about the route, Silas said, unfolding the paper map Declan had insisted on buying, despite the existence of GPS. If we take the 101 straight through to Arizona, we could be in Sedona by tomorrow night. Or, Declan said, glancing at the map, we could cut over to the coast again, head down through Malibu, then across through Joshua Tree. Add 2 days, but the light in the desert this time of year. We're already adding days by not taking the interstate. Is someone waiting for you? Does Elena have a deadline? Silas folded the map with more force than necessary. No, but that doesn't mean we should take the longest possible route to everywhere. Why not? What's the rush? Maybe I don't want to live in a car forever. Maybe I'd like to actually arrive somewhere. Declan was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. Is that what this is, living in a car? I didn't mean, Silas stopped recognizing the unfairness of his words. I'm sorry, I'm not mad at you. I'm mad at myself. For what? For getting comfortable, for starting to forget why I'm doing this trip in the first place. And why are you doing it? Silas looked out the window at the hills rolling past, golden and patient. I don't know anymore. They drove in silence for 30 miles. Not the comfortable quiet they'd developed, but something brittle and uncertain. Silas felt the space between them widening. With each mile, felt himself pulling back into the familiar fortress of solitude he'd occupied for so long. Finally, Declan pulled off at a rest stop, turned off the engine and sat there, hands still on the wheel. Talk to me, he said. Really talk to me. What's going on? I don't know how to do this. Do what? This. Let someone in. It's been so long since I... Silas pressed his palms against his eyes. Everyone I've let in has left. My dad, my mom, even though she didn't want to. And I know you're not leaving, not yet, but eventually this trip ends and we go our separate ways and I'll be alone again. And maybe it's easier to go back to being alone now than to wait for it to happen later. Declan reached over and gently pulled Silas's hands away from his face. Hey, look at me. Silas did. I can't promise you forever. I don't even know what my tomorrow looks like. But I can promise you this, I'm here now, fully here. And when this trip ends, we figure out what comes next together. Not you alone, not me alone, together. Okay, why are you being so patient with me? Because someone needs to be, and because I understand being scared of good things. Declan smiled sadly. I've spent my whole life being scared of good things. They sat there in the rest stop parking lot surrounded by families and long-haul truckers and people just passing through. And somehow in that completely ordinary place, something extraordinary shifted. Silas felt the fortress walls crack just a little, letting in light. Okay, he said finally. Joshua Tree. Let's take the long way. Declan's smile was sunrise breaking through clouds. Yeah, you're right. What's the rush? They got back on the road and the tension dissolved like morning fog. Declan told stories about photographing weddings early in his career, the disasters and triumphs, the couples who fought through their entire shoot, and the ones who couldn't stop touching each other. Silas found himself laughing real from the belly laughter that felt like medicine. What about you? Declan asked. Any relationship disasters in your past? Not really. There was someone in college sophomore year, Sarah. She was smart and funny and patient with my architect obsessions. What happened? My mom got diagnosed, and Sarah tried to be supportive, but Silas shrugged. Eventually, she realized she'd signed up to date me, not to be a caregiver's support system. Can't really blame her. I can. No, she was right to leave. I wasn't present anymore. I was already grieving someone who was still alive, and that's not fair to anyone, including yourself. They stopped for lunch in Ventura, eating fish tacos at a beachside shack where pelicans dive-bombed the water with militaristic precision. Declan pulled out his camera and captured the birds mid-plunge, the moment of perfect commitment before the splash. That's what I love about photography, he said, reviewing the shots. Everything commits. The pelican commits to the dive. The wave commits to breaking. Even the light commits to a specific angle at a specific moment. Nothing holds back. Must be nice. What? Being able to commit like that, without doubt or fear. Who says they're not afraid? Maybe fear is part of commitment. Maybe you can't really commit to something unless there's risk involved. Silas thought about that as they drove south through Malibu, past houses clinging to cliffs, like barnacles, past beaches where beautiful people did beautiful things under a beautiful sun. He thought about commitment and fear, and the way they might be the same thing viewed from different angles. As evening approached, they turned inland, heading toward Joshua Tree. The landscape transformed from coastal wealth to desert starkness. Strip malls gave way to vast emptiness, the kind of space that made you remember how small you were. They reached the national park at sunset, paying the entrance fee and following signs to a campground. But Declan drove past the official sites, following a dirt road that climbed into the hills. Where are we going? Silas asked. You'll see. The dirt road ended at a flat expanse surrounded by the park's namesake trees, those strange Dr. Seuss creations that looked like they'd been designed by a committee that couldn't agree on what a tree should be. Declan parked and got out, and Silas followed. The silence was profound. No traffic, no voices, no hum of civilization. Just wind and the creak of Joshua trees and the vast empty sky beginning to fill with stars. How did you find this place? Silas asked. Friend told me about it. Said it was the best spot in the park for night photography. Declan started setting up his camera equipment. Also happens to be perfect for camping, even though we're technically not supposed to be here. We're breaking the rules. We're bending them. There's a difference. They set up camp as darkness fell completely, the stars emerging in layers. First the bright ones, then the medium ones, then the faint ones you could only see with averted vision. Declan built a small fire and they sat beside it eating granola bars and drinking water, watching the Milky Way sprawl across the sky like spilled milk. I forget sometimes, Silas said quietly, that this is all up there. All these stars, all this vastness. Living in cities, you forget to look up. That's what I love about the desert. It forces you to look up because there's nothing else to look at. I don't know about that. These trees are pretty interesting. Says the architect. Says the person with working eyes. They lay back on their sleeping bags, still outside the tent, staring up at infinity. Silas tried to identify constellations, but kept losing track, distracted by shooting stars and satellites and his own thoughts spiraling outward. Can I tell you something? Declan said after a long silence. Always. I've been taking pictures of you throughout this trip. Not creepy, I hope, but I can't help it. The way you look at things, the expressions you make when you think no one's watching. You're fascinating through a lens. Silas turned his head to look at Declan. Can I see them? Really? Really? And Declan retrieved his laptop from the car, and they huddled together over the screen faces lit by the blue glow. And there Silas was captured in dozens of moments he hadn't known were being documented. Reading the map with his brow furrowed in concentration, laughing at something Declan had said, staring out the window with an expression of such profound sadness that Silas almost didn't recognize himself. But there were other photos too. Silas smiling at a sunrise. Silas running his hand along a weathered fence post. Silas tasting coffee with his eyes closed, savoring it. In these images, he looked alive in a way he hadn't felt in years. I look happy, Silas said almost accusingly. You were happy in those moments. I didn't realize. That's because you're too busy watching yourself to see what you actually look like. Declan scrolled to another photo, Silas standing at the edge of the Grand Canyon viewpoint they'd stopped at earlier, arms spread wide, face tilted toward the sun. That's you, not the you that you think you are, the you that you actually are. Silas didn't know what to say. Seeing himself through Declan's lens was like meeting a stranger who shared his face, a version of himself he'd forgotten existed. Or maybe one he'd never known was there at all. Thank you, he managed finally, for seeing me. Thank you for letting me. They stayed up late, Declan photographing the stars while Silas watched him work. There was something meditative about it, the way Declan set up each shot with deliberate care, checking exposures and angles, waiting for the right moment. He worked with the same commitment he'd identified in the Pelicans. Total fearless, willing to risk everything for a single perfect frame. Around midnight, they climbed into the tent, lay in their sleeping bags with just a few feet of space between them. Declan, yeah, I'm glad my car broke down. Me too. And I'm sorry about earlier, about wanting to rush. You don't have to apologize for being human. Still, you've been nothing but patient and kind, and I've been dealing with grief and loss and trying to figure out how to keep living. Yeah, terrible of you. Silas smiled in the darkness. You're good at this. At what? Making me feel less alone. Good, because you're not alone, not anymore. They woke to a desert dawn, the sun climbing over the horizon like it had invented the concept of morning. Everything was pink and gold and impossibly beautiful. They broke camp efficiently, two people learning each other's rhythms so well it felt choreographed. As they drove out of the park, Declan said, "There's something I need to tell you." Silas felt his stomach drop. Here it comes, he thought, the revelation that spoils everything. I have to make a stop in Sedona. There's someone I need to see. Okay, that's fine. Who? Declan's hands tightened on the wheel. A friend from before. I told them I'd be passing through and they want to talk. Something in Declan's tone suggested this was more than a casual visit, but Silas didn't press. Everyone was entitled to their secrets. God knows he had enough of his own. They drove through Arizona, the landscape shifting from Joshua Tree's weird beauty to something more classically southwestern, red rocks and vast skies and light that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Around noon, they stopped at a gas station, and while Declan filled the tank, Silas went inside for snacks. When he came back out, Declan was on the phone. His back was to Silas, shoulders tense, voice low but audible. I said I'd call when I got there. No, I'm not avoiding anything. Because I need time to think, that's why. Look, I'll be in Sedona tomorrow. We can talk then. But my answer hasn't changed. He hung up, then startled when he turned and saw Silas standing there with an armful of chips and candy bars. Everything okay? Silas asked carefully. Yeah, fine, just... The friend I mentioned. They're persistent. Sounds like more than a friend. It's complicated. Most things worth talking about are. They got back in the car, but the easy comfort of the morning had evaporated. Declan drove in silence, jaw tight, and Silas pretended to doze so he wouldn't have to acknowledge the tension. By evening, they reached Sedona. The town glowed in the sunset, the red rocks catching fire, the whole landscape looking like it had been painted by someone who'd never heard of subtlety. They found a motel on the outskirts cheaper than the touristy places downtown and checked in. I need to make a call, Declan said as soon as they entered their room. Do you mind? I go ahead. Declan stepped outside. Through the window, Silas watched him pace the parking lot, phone pressed to his ear, free hand gesturing emphatically. The conversation went on for 20 minutes. When Declan finally came back inside, he looked exhausted. There's a bar downtown, he said. Good music, apparently. Want to check it out? You sure you're up for it? I need a drink, and I need to not think for a few hours. So yeah, I'm up for it. The bar was called the Red Rocks Saloon, and it was exactly what the name suggested. Wooden floors, exposed beams, a long bar backed by bottles of every liquor imaginable. A local band played blues rock covers good enough to be entertaining, but not so good they demanded full attention. They found a table in the corner, ordered beers and nachos, and tried to recapture the ease they'd had before the phone call. But something had shifted. Some curtain had fallen, and Silas couldn't help feeling like he was waiting for the other shoe to drop. Halfway through their second beer, a man approached their table. Declan Foster. Jesus Christ. I can't believe you actually showed up. Declan's face went white. He stood slowly, and Silas saw his hands trembling. Marcus, what are you doing here? Looking for you, obviously. Jamie's been calling, texting. You shut off your phone. I told her I needed space. Space you call running away to Arizona space. Marcus, tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of presence that suggested he was used to being the biggest person in any room, turned to Silas. Did he tell you why he's on this road trip? Did he mention he's supposed to be getting married in 3 weeks? The world tilted. Silas gripped the edge of the table, trying to process the words. Marcus, stop, Declan said, his voice barely above a whisper. Stop. I drove 4 hours because my sister is crying herself to sleep every night, wondering what she did wrong. You owe her an explanation, Dec. You owe all of us one. I gave her an explanation. I told her, you told her you weren't ready, that you needed to think. But you didn't tell her the real reason, did you? Marcus's eyes flicked to Silas, then back to Declan. Does he know? Does your road trip buddy know why you really said no? Marcus, please. I'm gay. The words came out flat, matter-of-fact, like Declan was stating his name or age. But the impact was seismic. The bar noise faded to background hum. Silas's heart pounded in his ears. I'm gay, Declan repeated louder this time. I've known for years, but I didn't know how to. Jamie deserved better than a husband who was lying to himself and to her. So I said no, and yeah, I ran, because I didn't know what else to do. Marcus stared at him for a long moment. Then his shoulders sagged, the anger draining out of him. You should have told her the truth. I know, I'm going to. When I get back, when I figure out how to explain something I don't fully understand myself. She thinks it's her fault. It's not. It was never her fault. It's mine for not being brave enough to admit who I am. Marcus nodded slowly, then looked at Silas again. I'm sorry you got caught in the middle of this. He turned and walked out of the bar, leaving a wake of stares and whispers behind him. Silas sat frozen, his mind racing. Married. Declan was supposed to get married. Had been engaged, had planned a life with someone, and had said no and run away and never mentioned any of it. Silas, Declan started, you lied to me. I didn't lie, I just didn't. You let me think you were on this trip for the same reasons I am. To figure things out, to deal with the loss, to find some kind of peace. But really, you're just running away from your responsibilities. That's not fair, isn't it? You have someone waiting for you, someone who loves you, who wants to marry you, and you're out here playing road trip with a stranger instead of dealing with your actual life. It's not that simple. It never is. Silas stood, throwing cash on the table. I need air. He walked out of the bar into Sedona's strange desert night. The red rocks glowed under moonlight, beautiful and indifferent. Behind him, he heard Declan calling his name, but he didn't stop. He walked until he found himself at a small park, sitting on a bench, staring at nothing. Declan found him 20 minutes later. Sat down on the opposite end of the bench, careful to maintain distance. You have every right to be angry, Declan said. I'm not angry. You're not. I'm hurt, which is stupid because we barely know each other. We've been on the road for what, a week? That doesn't give me the right to feel betrayed. But you do feel betrayed. Yes, because I thought. Silas stopped, not sure how to finish the sentence. I don't know what I thought. They sat in silence, two people on a bench in a strange town surrounded by rocks that had been there for millions of years and would be there for millions more. What were human complications compared to that kind of time? I said no to her because I realized I've been lying to myself for years, Declan said quietly. Jamie proposed, and I should have been happy, should have felt excited or nervous or something. But all I felt was trapped. And I knew in that moment that if I said yes, I'd be lying to her and to myself for the rest of our lives. Because you're gay. Because I'm gay. Because I've spent 23 years performing straightness so convincingly that I almost believed it myself. Because the idea of living an authentic life terrified me more than the idea of living a false one. And now Now I'm trying to figure out what authentic it looks like. I'm trying to unlearn a lifetime of pretending. Declan turned to face Silas. And I think I've been falling for you since the first mile. Silas's breath caught. Declan, you don't have to say anything. I know this is a lot, and it's probably the worst timing imaginable. But you asked me to be honest to show you the unedited version. So here it is. I'm 23, I'm gay. I just ran away from my own engagement, and I'm falling for someone I met because his car broke down. Declan laughed without humor. I'm a mess, a complete disaster of a human being. You're not a disaster. No, no, you're someone trying to be honest for the first time in his life. That takes courage. Or stupidity. Maybe both. They sat there as the night deepened, the air cooling, the stars emerging one by one. Silas felt like he was standing at the edge of something vast and unknown, like the Grand Canyon, but internal. A choice point, a moment where he could step back to safety or step forward into uncertainty. I don't know what to do with this, Silas said finally, with what you just told me. You don't have to do anything. I just needed you to know the truth. Do you still want to continue this trip together? Do you? I don't know. Part of me wants to rent a car and drive straight to Santa Fe and forget any of this happened. But part of me, he trailed off. Part of you what? Part of me has been falling too, and that scares me more than anything. Declan moved closer, closing the distance on the bench. Why, Tahawa? Because everyone I've let myself care about has left. Because I don't know how to trust good things anymore. Because you're still figuring out who you are, and I can't be your experiment. Is that what you think this is, an experiment? I don't know what this is. Neither do I, but I know it's real. And I know I've never felt this way about anyone before, man or woman. And I know that scares the hell out of me, but it also feels like the first honest thing I've experienced in my entire life. Silas looked at Declan, really looked at him, saw the fear and hope and desperate honesty in his eyes, saw a person trying to be brave despite not knowing how. I can't do this right now, Silas said, standing. I need to think, I need to sleep, I need to wake up tomorrow and see if this all still feels real or if it was just the beer and the desert and the impossibility of everything. Okay, that's okay. They walked back to the motel in silence, entered their room like strangers, maintained careful distance as they got ready for bed. Lay in the darkness, listening to each other, breathe. Silas, Declan's voice came soft through the dark. Yeah, whatever you decide, whatever happens next, thank you for listening, for not running, for giving me a chance to tell the truth. Good night, Declan. Good night. But sleep didn't come easily. Silas lay awake for hours, his mind spinning through everything that had happened, everything that had been said. He thought about his mother's letters still unread in the wooden box. He thought about Elena waiting in Santa Fe. He thought about his own heart cracked open by grief, and now threatening to crack open again for entirely different reasons. And he thought about Declan, beautiful, honest, terrified Declan lying a few feet away, probably awake too, probably wondering if he just destroyed the best thing that had happened to him in years. Around 3 in the morning, Silas heard Declan get up, heard him slip out of the room, closing the door carefully behind him. Through the window, Silas watched him walk to the edge of the motel parking lot and sit on the curb, head in his hands. Silas should have let him be, should have respected the need for space. But instead, he found himself getting dressed, slipping on shoes, walking outside. He sat down on the curb next to Declan. Said nothing, just sat there, two people in the middle of the night, in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of their lives falling apart and possibly coming together. After a long silence, Declan said, I thought I'd lost you. You haven't. I'm right here. Are you? I'm trying to be. Declan turned to look at him, eyes red-rimmed and exhausted. What are you so afraid of? The same thing you are, that this is real. And if it is, then we have to decide what to do about it. And if we decide to do something about it and it doesn't work out and we get hurt, then we get hurt. That's what happens when you commit. When you dive like the pelican, even though you might hit the water wrong and it might hurt, you dive anyway. Is that what you want? Tuaham, Silas thought about his mother's last letter, the one he still hadn't read. Thought about her words that he remembered from before. Find someone who makes you brave enough to be afraid. I want to try, he said. I'm terrified, and I don't know what I'm doing, and you're still figuring out who you are, but I want to try. Even though I'm a mess, because you're a mess, because I'm a mess, because maybe two messes can figure out how to be less messy together. Declan laughed, small and fragile, but genuine. That's the worst romantic declaration I've ever heard. I'm an architect, not a poet. Good thing I'm a photographer and not a writer. They sat there as the sky began to lighten that pre-dawn gray that promised day was coming, whether they were ready or not. And in that liminal space between night and morning, between who they'd been and who they might become, Silas reached out and took Declan's hand. It was such a simple gesture, just skin on skin, fingers intertwining, the most basic form of human connection. But it felt monumental. It felt like a commitment. So what now? Declan asked, looking down at their joined hands. Now we go inside, we sleep for a few hours, and then we figure out the next part, which is, I don't know, but we figure it out together. They went back inside as the sun began to rise over Sedona's red rocks, lay down in their separate beds, but with hands still clasped across the space between them. And this time when sleep came, it came easy. Morning arrived too soon and too bright. Silas woke to find Declan already up, sitting by the window, with a cup of coffee, staring at something on his laptop. Morning, Silas said, his voice rough with sleep. Morning, there's more coffee in the pot. Silas poured himself a cup and sat on his bed watching Declan. What are you looking at? Photos. Trying to choose what to submit to the Santa Fe Collective. He turned the laptop so Silas could see. What do you think, the Pelican series or the Desert Stars? What about the ones of me? Declan looked surprised. You'd let me submit those. They're good, really good. They tell a story. They tell our story. Is that a bad thing? No, it's just, I didn't expect you to be okay with that. I'm learning to be okay with a lot of things I didn't expect. They drank their coffee in comfortable silence. The tension of last night dissolved into something softer, more hopeful. Eventually, Declan closed his laptop. We should talk about what happens next, he said. I thought we figured that out. We continue to Santa Fe. No, I mean after Santa Fe, after this trip ends, because it will end, and we need to figure out what that looks like. Silas set down his coffee cup. You need to go back and talk to Jamie. Give her the explanation she deserves. I know. And you need to figure out who you are without an audience, without performing. You need time. I know that too. And I need to see Elena. I need to deal with my grief instead of running from it. I need to read my mother's letters. So where does that leave us? I don't know, but I know I don't want this to be just a road trip. I don't want us to be just two people who shared a car for a week and then went back to our separate lives. Neither do I. So maybe we don't decide everything right now. Maybe we just keep moving forward and see where the road takes us. That's very zen of you. I'm learning from a photographer who believes in taking the scenic route. Declan smiled and something in Silas's chest unclenched. They were going to be okay. Maybe not today, maybe not next week, but eventually, they were going to figure this out. They packed up their things and loaded the car. As they were leaving, Declan stopped at the motel office and asked about good viewpoints for sunrise. The clerk recommended a spot about 40 minutes away, a viewpoint overlooking the Grand Canyon. It's a bit out of the way, the clerk said, but if you've got time, it's worth it. Declan looked at Silas. You wanted the scenic route, Silas replied. Always. They drove through the Arizona morning past red rocks and pine forests, past small towns that looked like movie sets. The Grand Canyon emerged gradual, the earth opening up like a wound revealing layers of time and stone. They arrived at the viewpoint just as the sun was reaching its full strength, walked to the edge and stood there looking down into impossible depth. The canyon stretched for miles in every direction, a testament to patience and persistence and the slow work of water carving through stone. It's humbling, Silas said. Makes you realize how small we are, or how big the world is. They stood there for a long time, not speaking, just breathing in the scale of it. Other tourists arrived and left, taking photos and exclaiming and moving on. But Silas and Declan remained rooted to that spot, held by something neither could name. Eventually, Declan reached out and took Silas's hand. No words, no explanation, just connection. Silas felt tears on his face and didn't bother wiping them away. Let them fall salt water joining ancient stone. Let himself feel the grief and the hope and the terrifying possibility of happiness. I'm scared, he whispered. Me too. But I'm here. Me too. They turned away from the canyon and walked back to the car, hands still joined, loaded up and started driving again, heading south and east toward Santa Fe, toward whatever waited there. As they drove, Declan said, "Can I ask you something? Anything. The wooden box. Your mom's letters. When are you going to read them?" "Soon, maybe tonight. Maybe when we get to Santa Fe." Silas looked out the window at the landscape streaming past. "I think I'm almost ready." "What changed?" "You did. This trip did. I realized that I've been so afraid of using up her words that I've been denying myself her wisdom. And that's not what she would have wanted." "What would she have wanted?" "For me to live. Really live, not just exist. To be brave enough to be happy even when being happy feels like a betrayal." "It's not a betrayal. I know that now." They drove on through Arizona, through landscapes that looked like they belonged on Mars, past billboards advertising things that didn't exist, and towns that barely did. Stopped for lunch at a roadside diner where the waitress called them "Hun," and the coffee tasted like it had been brewing since the 80s. "Can I tell you what I want?" Declan said over greasy burgers and fries. "Please. When this is over, the trip, all of it, I want to take you on a real date. Not just sharing a car or camping or being road trip buddies. An actual date. Dinner, maybe a movie. Normal things that normal people do when they're figuring out if they like each other. I already know I like you. Then a date to figure out if we can be good together outside of this bubble we've created. I'd like that." "Yeah, yeah." They finished lunch and got back on the road. As the afternoon stretched long and golden, they crossed from Arizona into New Mexico. The landscape shifted again, becoming something more sparse and strange, all sky and space, and the occasional cluster of buildings huddled against the vastness. Around sunset, they stopped at a small overlook. Declan grabbed his camera and set up a shot, the sun dropping toward the horizon, painting everything in shades of amber and rose. But instead of photographing the sunset, he turned the camera toward Silas. "Do you mind?" "Go ahead." Declan took the shot, then another, then a dozen more, capturing Silas in the golden light, face turned toward the dying sun, expression somewhere between melancholy and peace. When he was done, he showed Silas the images. And there he was again, the stranger, with his face the person he was becoming. "I look different," Silas said. "You're different. We both are." "Is that good?" "I think so. I hope so." They got back in the car for the final stretch to Santa Fe. As they drove, Silas pulled out his phone and texted Elena. "Almost there. See you tomorrow." Her response came immediately. "Can't wait. I have a guest room ready. Bring your friend. There is space for both of you. She says we can both stay with her," Silas said. "Are you sure I don't want to intrude?" "You're not intruding. Besides, I think I might need you there. For moral support." "Then I'm there." They drove into Santa Fe as night fell, the city glowing against the desert darkness. Found Elena's address in a quiet neighborhood where adobe houses lined narrow streets and the air smelled like pinyon smoke. Elena opened the door before they could knock. A small woman with gray streaked hair and the kind of eyes that saw through pretense straight to truth. "Silas," she said, pulling him into a hug. "Oh, honey, I'm so glad you came." "This is Declan," Silas said when she released him. "We've been traveling together. The one whose car didn't break down." "That's me," Declan said, smiling. "Well, come in. Both of you. You must be exhausted." They carried their bags inside to a house that felt like a sanctuary, all soft colors and comfortable furniture, and the kind of organized chaos that came from a life fully lived. Elena showed them to the guest room, one bed, but she didn't comment on the arrangement. "I'll let you settle in," she said. "There's food in the kitchen if you're hungry. Otherwise, rest. We'll talk in the morning." After she left, Silas and Declan looked at the single bed, then at each other. "I can sleep on the floor," Declan offered. "Or we could share, like adults. Adults who are figuring out if they're dating. Adults who definitely are dating but taking it slow. Is that what we're doing?" "I think so, unless you have a better definition." Declan smiled. "No, that works for me." They got ready for bed, navigating the small space with the practiced ease of people who'd been sharing rooms for days. Climbed under the covers, maintaining a respectful distance at first, then gradually drifting closer until they were touching shoulders, arms, hands. Silas, Declan's voice came soft in the darkness. Yeah, thank you for not giving up on me. In Sedona after Marcus showed up, you could have walked away. So could you, when I was difficult, when I got scared. But you didn't, because you're worth it. So are you. They fell asleep like that, tangled together in Elena's guest bed in Santa Fe at the end of a journey that was really just the beginning. Morning in Santa Fe came with the smell of coffee and the sound of Elena humming in the kitchen. Silas woke to find Declan already awake, propped up on one elbow, watching him with an expression Silas couldn't quite read. "How long have you been awake?" Silas asked, voice rough with sleep. "A while. You talk in your sleep." "I do not." "You do. Nothing coherent, just sounds, like you're having a conversation with someone who's not there." Silas sat up, running a hand through his hair. "My mom used to say I did that as a kid. She'd come check on me, and I'd be arguing with dream people." "What were you arguing about?" "She never told me, said it was between me and my subconscious." They got dressed and made their way to the kitchen, where Elena had laid out a spread that suggested she'd been cooking since dawn: eggs, toast fruit, some kind of breakfast casserole that smelled like heaven. "I wasn't sure what you liked," she said, "so I made everything." "You didn't have to go to all this trouble," Silas protested. "Honey, I've been waiting a year for you to visit. Let me have this." They ate while Elena asked gentle questions about the trip, about how they'd met, about what brought them to Santa Fe. She had a way of listening that made you want to tell the truth, not the sanitized version, but the messy, complicated reality. It was why she was good at her job. "So," she said, pouring more coffee, "what's the plan for today?" Silas and Declan exchanged glances. They hadn't discussed a plan beyond arriving. "I thought maybe I could show Declan around the city," Silas said. "If that's okay with you, Declan. I know you need to work on your portfolio." "The light's better in the afternoon anyway," Declan replied. "I'd like to see Santa Fe through your eyes." "Then it's settled," Elena said. "I have clients this morning anyway, but tonight dinner here. I want to hear all the stories you haven't told me yet." After breakfast, Silas and Declan walked downtown through streets that smelled like roasting chilies and juniper smoke. The architecture was all earth tones and rounded corners, buildings that looked like they'd grown from the ground rather than being built on it. "It's beautiful here," Declan said, already snapping photos. "Different from anywhere we've been. Elena moved here about 5 years ago, said she needed a place where the sky was big enough to breathe in." "I get that." They wandered through art galleries and shops selling turquoise jewelry and woven blankets, stopped at a cafe where the coffee came with a side of local honey and the barista knew everyone's name, sat in the plaza watching people and pigeons and clouds that looked like they'd been painted onto the blue. "Can I ask you something?" Declan said, stirring honey into his coffee. "Sure. When are you going to tell me about Elena? I mean, really tell me. Why you came here, why she's so important to you." Silas watched a child chase pigeons in circles, laughing with the unself-conscious joy that adults forgot how to access. "We grew up next door to each other in a small town in Washington. She was 5 years older, and she kind of adopted me as her weird little neighbor friend. When her parents divorced, she used to climb through my bedroom window and sleep on my floor because her house was too loud with fighting. When my parents fought, I'd go to her house and we'd make blanket forts, and she'd tell me stories until I forgot to be scared. She sounds like a good friend. The best. When my dad left, she was the one who told me it wasn't my fault. When my mom got sick, she was the one who sent me articles about caregiver burnout and called me every week to make sure I was eating. And now she's a counselor, specializing in grief and loss. Ironic, right? Or maybe inevitable. We become what we need to understand." Declan reached across the table and took Silas's hand. The gesture was becoming natural, automatic. "Are you nervous about seeing her? Really seeing her, I mean. Not just visiting." "Terrified, because she'll ask me how I'm doing and I won't be able to lie. And I don't know if I'm ready to tell the truth." "What is the truth?" Silas looked at their joined hands. "That I'm not okay. That I'm barely holding it together. That some days I wake up and forget for half a second that my mom is dead. And then I remember and it's like losing her all over again. and that I feel guilty for being here, for being alive, for starting to feel happy again. Survivor's guilt. Is that what it's called? It's what Elena will probably call it. It's common with people who've lost someone after a long illness. You spent so long in crisis mode that normal life feels wrong. How do you know that? Declan looked away. I looked it up. After you told me about your mom. I wanted to understand what you were going through. Something in Silas's chest cracked open. You researched grief. I researched you, or at least I tried to understand you better. I know it's probably weird. Silas leaned across the table and kissed him. Brief, soft tasting of honey and coffee. When he pulled back, Declan's eyes were wide. What was that for? For caring, for trying, for being exactly who you are. They finished their coffee in comfortable silence, hands still joined across the table. Then they walked more through neighborhoods where adobe houses hid behind walls covered in bougainvillea, past churches older than the country they stood in, through a cemetery where the graves were decorated with plastic flowers that never died. Can we talk about something? Declan said as they sat on a bench at the edge of the cemetery. That sounds ominous. It's not. I need to know what you're thinking about us, about what happens after this. Silas had been avoiding this conversation, but he knew it was inevitable. I don't know what to think. Part of me wants to hold on to this to pretend we can just keep driving forever, but I know that's not realistic. What's the other part? The other part is terrified, because I like you, Declan, more than I should after such a short time. And I know you need to figure out who you are without an audience. You need time to be gay without it being tied to me, to us. And I need time to deal with my grief instead of using you as a distraction from it. Is that what I am, a distraction? No, God, no. You're the first person in months who's made me feel like life might be worth living again. But that's exactly why I'm scared. What if this is just the road trip? What if we get back to real life and realize we don't actually work? And what if we do work? Then I'll have to learn how to let someone in again, how to trust that they won't leave, how to believe I deserve good things. Declan turned to face him fully. Do you want to know what I think? Always. I think we're both scared. I think we're both carrying around so much baggage that we can barely walk. But I also think that what we have is real and rare and worth fighting for. Even if it's messy. Even if we don't know what we're doing. You make it sound so simple. It is simple. We like each other. We care about each other. Everything else is just details we can figure out. I wish I had your optimism. You don't need optimism. You just need willingness to try, to risk, to believe that sometimes good things happen to good people. They sat there as afternoon light slanted through the cemetery's trees, painting everything in shades of gold. Around them, the dead rested peacefully, unburdened by questions of tomorrow. That evening, they returned to Elena's house for dinner. She'd made enchiladas and beans and rice, and they ate on her back patio under strings of lights that turned the yard into something magical. So, Elena said, pouring wine, tell me the real story, how you actually met, what you've been doing on this trip, all the parts you haven't told me yet. And so they did. Silas and Declan trading stories, finishing each other's sentences, laughing at shared memories that were only a week old but felt ancient. Elena listened with that particular quality of attention that made you feel heard, really heard for the first time in your life. When they finished, she sat back and smiled. You two are good together. We barely know each other, Silas protested. Time isn't the same as depth. Sometimes you can know someone for years and never really see them. And sometimes you can meet someone and recognize them immediately. Is that your professional opinion? That's my friend opinion. My professional opinion is that you both need therapy, but that's true of everyone, so it doesn't count. They laughed and the conversation moved to easier topics. Elena's work, the Santa Fe art scene, the best hiking trails in the area. But as the evening wore on, Silas felt a heaviness settling over him. He'd been avoiding something and Elena knew it. After Declan went inside to take a phone call, Elena turned to Silas with that look, the one that said it was time to stop pretending. How are you really doing, sweetheart? I don't know how to answer that. Try the truth. The truth is, I'm a mess. I'm barely functioning. Some days I forget to eat. Some days I can't stop eating. I haven't opened my mom's letters because I'm terrified of what they say. I haven't applied for any jobs because I don't know who I am without her. And I met this amazing person, and all I can think is how I'm going to ruin it because I don't know how to be happy anymore. Elena reached over and took his hand. Grief isn't something you get over, Silas. It's something you learn to carry. And right now you're learning. You're doing the work even when it doesn't feel like it. It doesn't feel like I'm doing anything except running away. Running away is sometimes the first step toward running back. You needed to leave Seattle. You needed distance from all those memories. And you needed to remember that life still exists beyond your grief. But what if I don't deserve it? What if I'm being selfish by trying to be happy when she's not here? What if your mother would want you to be happy? What if the greatest gift you could give, her memory, is living the life she couldn't? Silas felt tears on his face. I miss her so much. I know, honey. I know. They sat there as the night deepened, Elena holding space for Silas's grief the way she'd always done. Eventually, Declan came back outside, saw Silas crying, and quietly asked Elena if they could have a moment. When they were alone, Declan sat next to Silas and pulled him into a hug. Silas buried his face in Declan's shoulder and cried in a way he hadn't allowed himself to cry since the funeral. Deep, wrenching fish that shook his whole body. I've got you, Declan murmured. I've got you. They stayed like that until Silas had no tears left, until he was empty and exhausted and somehow lighter. Thank you, Silas whispered. For what? For not being scared of my grief, for holding me through it. Always. The next morning, Elena had to work, so Silas and Declan decided to take a drive out to the desert. Declan wanted to photograph the landscape, and Silas needed space to think. They drove north out of Santa Fe, following a highway that wound through high desert and rust-colored rock formations. The sky was impossibly blue, the kind of blue that hurt to look at directly. About an hour from the city, dark clouds appeared on the horizon. At first they seemed far away, but they moved with surprising speed, eating up the blue sky. That doesn't look good, Silas said, watching the clouds advance. We should probably turn back. But before they could, the storm hit. Not gradually, but all at once, wind that rocked the car, rain that fell so hard they couldn't see 10 feet in front of them. Declan pulled over to the side of the road, hazards blinking uselessly in the downpour. This is crazy, Declan said. I've never seen rain like this. Desert storms. They come fast and hit hard. They sat there for 20 minutes waiting for it to pass. But it didn't pass. If anything, it got worse. The radio crackled with warnings about flash flooding and advised travelers to seek shelter immediately. There, Silas said, pointing to a structure barely visible through the rain. Looks like an old house or cabin, better than staying in the car. They made a run for it, getting soaked in the 30 seconds it took to reach the building. It was indeed a cabin abandoned probably for years, but still intact. The door hung open on rusty hinges. Inside, it smelled like dust and time. One room with a fireplace, a few pieces of broken furniture, and windows that rattled in the wind. But it was dry, and it was shelter. Well, Declan said, wringing out his shirt, this is romantic. We're going to die of hypothermia in an abandoned cabin. Very romantic. We're not going to die. We're going to make a fire and wait out the storm like pioneers. Remarkably, there was wood stacked beside the fireplace, old but dry. Declan used his lighter and some paper from his backpack to get a fire going. Within minutes, warmth spread through the small space. They hung their wet clothes near the fire and wrapped themselves in the emergency blankets Declan kept in his car, sat on the floor with their backs against the wall, listening to rain hammer the roof. This is insane, Silas said. This is an adventure. We could have died. The road could have flooded. We could have driven off the edge. But we didn't. We're here. We're safe. We're together. Silas looked at Declan, hair plastered to his head, emergency blanket wrapped around his shoulders, smiling like this was the best thing that had happened all day. And something shifted in Silas's chest, a realization settling into place. I need to read them, he said suddenly. Read what? My mother's letters. I need to read them. Now. Now here. Yes, because if I don't do it now, I never will. And I need to know what she wanted to tell me. Silas went to his backpack and retrieved the wooden box. His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside, stacked neatly, were dozens of envelopes, each labeled with a date. The first one said, "For the first week." He opened it carefully, unfolding the paper inside. His mother's handwriting shaky but legible, written when her hands were already failing. "My darling boy, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you're probably hurting in ways I can't imagine. I'm so sorry for that. I'm sorry for leaving you too soon, for all the things I won't be there to see your first real job, your wedding, your children if you choose to have them. But I need you to know something. These last 3 years, watching you give up your dreams to care for me, seeing you sacrifice your life for mine, it broke my heart. You were so brave, so selfless, so loving. But you were also so sad. And I don't want my death to be the thing that defines your life. So here's what I want you to do live. Really live, not the careful, safe version where you protect yourself from hurt. The messy, risky version where you let yourself love and be loved, where you take chances and make mistakes and learn to forgive yourself for being human. Find joy, Silas. Find it in small things and big things. Find it in ordinary days and extraordinary moments. And when you find it, don't feel guilty. Don't think you are betraying me by being happy. Your happiness is the greatest gift you could give me. I love you more than all the stars and all the skies, more than all the words and all the books, more than I could ever express in a lifetime of trying. Don't spend your life being afraid to live. Find someone who makes you brave enough to be afraid. All my love always, Mom. Silas finished reading and looked up to find Declan watching him, tears streaming down his face. She was right, Silas whispered. About what? About everything. About being brave. About finding law. About you. About me. You make me brave enough to be afraid. Declan moved closer. Silas, I need to say something, and I need you to listen without interrupting. Okay. I like you. More than like you. I think I might be falling in love with you, which is crazy because we've known each other for barely a week. But it's true. And it terrifies me because everyone I've loved has left, and I don't think I could survive losing someone else. You're not going to lose me. You don't know that. You're still figuring out who you are. You just came out. You have a whole life to live that doesn't include me. And I need you to live that life. I need you to explore being gay without it being tied to me, to us. Because if we do this now and it doesn't work out, I'll always wonder if it was real or if we were just two broken people who found each other at the right moment. So what are you saying? I'm saying that I want this. I want you. But not yet. Not until you've had time to figure yourself out and I've had time to deal with my grief properly. Not until we can come to each other whole instead of using each other to fill the gaps. Declan was quiet for a long time. How much time? I don't know, months maybe, however long it takes. And what if I figure myself out and you work through your grief and we're different people by then? What if it doesn't work? Then at least we'll know we tried and we'll have done it the right way. The right way? Is there a right way to fall in love? I don't know, but I know the wrong way is rushing in before we're ready. Silas leaned forward and kissed Declan, slow, deep, full of everything he felt and couldn't say. When they pulled apart, both were crying. I hate that you're right, Declan said. I hate it too. But I understand and I respect it. And I'll wait. You will. For you, I'd wait forever. They held each other as the storm raged outside, the fire crackling beside them. Eventually the rain slowed, then stopped. The clouds broke apart, revealing a sky washed clean. They drove back to Santa Fe in silence, both processing what had been said and what it meant. That night they slept in the same bed, but without touching, maintaining a distance that hurt more than Silas wanted to admit. The next morning, Declan announced he was leaving. I need to go back, he said over breakfast. I need to talk to Jamie in person. I need to have the conversations I've been avoiding. And I need to start figuring out who Declan Foster is when he's not performing for anyone. When will you go? Today, this morning. If I don't do it now, I'll find excuses to stay. Silas nodded, throat tight. Okay. They loaded Declan's car in silence. Elena watched from the doorway, understanding written across her face. When everything was packed, Declan turned to Silas. This isn't goodbye. It feels like goodbye. It's see you later. There's a difference. How will I know when you're ready? You'll know, I promise you'll know. They hugged for a long time, neither wanting to be the first to let go. When they finally pulled apart, Silas felt like he was tearing off a piece of himself. Drive safe, he said, always. Declan got in his car, started the engine, rolled down the window for one last look. Hey, Silas. Yeah, thank you for everything, for seeing me, for making me brave enough to face myself. Thank you for the same. Then Declan drove away and Silas stood in Elena's driveway watching until the car disappeared around a corner. Elena came out and stood beside him, not saying anything, just being present. Did I just make the biggest mistake of my life? Silas asked. No, honey. I think you just made the bravest decision of your life. The days after Declan left were hard. Silas felt his absence like a physical ache, a phantom limb that he kept reaching for. But Elena was there, patient and present, helping him do the work he'd been avoiding. They talked about his mother, about grief and guilt and the complicated relief that comes after prolonged suffering, about survivor's guilt and depression and the long, slow work of healing. It's okay to be happy, Elena said one afternoon as they sat in her backyard. It's okay to laugh without feeling guilty. It's okay to look forward to tomorrow. It doesn't feel okay. Feelings aren't facts, they're just feelings. They'll catch up eventually. Silas read more of his mother's letters, one for each day, then one for each week. Each one a gift, a piece of wisdom, a reminder that she'd known him better than he knew himself. She wrote about resilience and hope, about the importance of community and connection, about choosing love even when love was scary. In one letter dated for 6 months after her death, she wrote, "By now you've probably met someone, or maybe you're still alone. Either is okay. But if you have met someone and you're scared, remember this. Love isn't about certainty. It's about willingness. The willingness to be vulnerable, to risk hurt, to believe that connection is worth the potential for loss. I'm gone, and that hurts. But would you trade away our time together just to avoid this pain? I wouldn't. Not for anything. So if you've found someone who makes you feel alive, hold on to them. Not with desperation, but with openness. Give them space to be human. Let yourself be human too. And trust that even if it doesn't work out, the experience of loving will have changed you for the better." Silas read that letter 3 times, then put it back in the box with the others. He was up to letter 37. Still dozens more to go, a whole roadmap his mother had left him, guiding him through grief and toward life. One evening, about 2 weeks after Declan left, Silas and Elena sat on her patio watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. "Can I tell you what I think?" Elena said. "You're going to regardless. I think you're afraid of being happy because happiness feels like betrayal, like you're leaving your mother behind. But Silas, she's not behind. She's everywhere. In your memories, in those letters, in the way you move through the world. And the best way to honor her isn't to be miserable. It's to live the life she wanted for you. What if I don't know, Hadpaim? Then you learn, you practice, you take it one day at a time. And Declan, what about him? Was I wrong to send him away? Do you think you were? I don't know. Part of me thinks I should have taken what we had while we had it, but part of me knows we needed this. Space to become people who can actually be together instead of just 2 people running from their problems. Then trust that part. Trust that if it's meant to be, you'll find your way back to each other." Silas thought about that as the sky darkened and stars emerged, thought about roads and destinations and the long way home. 3 months passed. Silas stayed in Santa Fe getting a job at a local architecture firm that designed sustainable housing. It wasn't his dream job, but it was a start, a way to use his skills while figuring out what his actual dreams were. He made friends slowly, carefully, but genuinely, joined Elena's book club, started hiking on weekends, read all of his mother's letters, then read them again, finding new meaning each time. He thought about Declan every day, wondered where he was, what he was doing, if he'd figured out who he was. They'd agreed not to contact each other during this time, to give each other space to grow. It was the hardest thing Silas had ever done. Then on a Tuesday in early November, a package arrived. It was heavy, wrapped in brown paper, addressed in handwriting Silas recognized immediately. His hands shook as he opened it. Inside was a photo book, handmade, beautifully bound, filled with photographs from their road trip. But these weren't just random shots. They told a story. Their story. The first photo, Silas on Cannon Beach holding the wooden box, sunrise breaking behind him. Then both of them reflected in a diner window, laughing over pie. The pelicans diving at sunset. Silas standing at the edge of the Grand Canyon, arms spread wide. The two of them around a campfire, faces lit by flames. Silas crying in Sedona after Marcus left, their hands clasped across a table, the desert under stars. Silas reading his mother's letter in the abandoned cabin firelight, catching the tears on his face. The last photograph showed a long, empty road stretching toward the horizon, and beneath it, handwritten in Declan's careful script, "I've figured out who I am, and I know where I want to go. Can I pick you up at 8? Silas looked at the clock, 7:30. He showered quickly, changed into clean clothes, tried to calm his racing heart. At 7:55, he stood by the window watching the street. At exactly 800, a familiar Subaru Outback pulled up in front of Elena's house. Declan got out. He looked different, leaner maybe, more settled in his skin. He held a bouquet of wildflowers, looking nervous in a way that made Silas's heart ache with affection. Silas opened the door before Declan could knock. They stood there looking at each other across the threshold. 3 months of growth and change and becoming visible in their faces. "Hi," Declan said. "Hi. So, I've figured out who I am." "Yeah. Yeah, I'm a photographer. I'm gay. I'm someone who takes the scenic route even when it doesn't make sense. I'm someone who sees beauty in broken things. And I'm someone who fell in love on a road trip and spent 3 months becoming the kind of person who deserved that love." Declan. "I talked to Jamie, really talked to her. She was hurt, but she understood. She even thanked me for being honest. I came out to my family. It was messy and hard, and some of them aren't speaking to me, but I did it. I'm living in San Francisco now, working for a photography collective. I'm in therapy. I'm dating, or I was briefly, just to see what it was like. And through all of it, I kept thinking about you, about us, about whether I was ready. And are you ready?" "I think so, or at least I'm ready to try, if you'll have me." Silas stepped forward, taking the flowers, setting them aside. "I read all my mother's letters. I'm in therapy too. I'm working as an architect, not designing dream libraries yet, but houses that real people will live in. I've made friends. I've started to figure out how to be happy without feeling guilty about it. And I've thought about you every single day. So where does that leave us? It leaves us here, standing at the beginning, ready to try this the right way." "The right way," Declan repeated, which is taking our time, going on actual dates, learning each other outside of a crisis, building something that lasts instead of something that burns bright and fast. "I can do that." "Yeah, yeah." Silas closed the distance between them and kisses Declan. It felt like the first time and the 100th time all at once, familiar and new, coming home and setting out on an adventure. When they pulled apart, both were crying and smiling. "So," Declan said, "can I take you to dinner? I found this great new Mexican place. They make the best enchiladas in the city, apparently." "I'd love that, but first there's someone you should say hello to." Elena appeared in the doorway smiling. "Declan Foster, about time you got here." "Sorry I'm late." "You're exactly on time. Now go feed this boy. He's been moping for 3 months and it's getting old." "I have not been moping," Silas protested. "You've been moping," Elena and Declan said in unison. They laughed and Silas felt something settle in his chest, something that felt like peace, like possibility, like the beginning of a story he'd been afraid to start writing. They went to dinner. They talked for hours. They held hands across the table and remembered how to be two people choosing each other instead of two people fleeing their pasts. After dinner, they walked through downtown Santa Fe, past the galleries and shops, through the plaza where they'd sat months ago. "Can I tell you something?" Silas said. "Always. I'm still scared. Of this, of us, of letting myself believe it can work." "Me too. I think that's part of it. Being scared means it matters. The pelican diving into the water." "Exactly." They found a bench and sat watching the evening crowd thin out as night settled in. "So what now?" Declan asked. "I mean, I'm in San Francisco. You're here. That's 1,000 miles. We figure it out. We visit. We video call. We take it slow and see where it goes. And if it's too hard, if the distance is too much, then we'll deal with it. But I don't think it will be. I think we've already done the hard part, which is becoming people who can actually be together. Everything else is just logistics." Declan pulled out his phone and showed Silas something. I applied to MFA programs, photography, UCLA, Arizona State, and the University of New Mexico. You did. I need to keep growing as an artist. And if I happen to apply to schools that would put me closer to you, well, that's just good planning. Silas laughed. That's very good planning. Huh? So you're not mad that I'm trying to be closer? I'm the opposite of mad. I'm grateful and terrified, but mostly grateful. They sat there as the stars emerged bright and clear in the desert sky. Around them, the city hummed with life, people going about their evenings, couples on dates, friends laughing, strangers becoming less strange. The eternal dance of human connection. Silas, Declan said softly. Yeah, I know we're taking it slow. I know we're being careful. But I need you to know I love you. I've loved you since you stood on that beach holding that box, looking like you were saying goodbye to the whole world. And I'll keep loving you whether we're 1,000 miles apart or living next door to each other. Silas felt tears slide down his face. I love you too. I think I have from the moment you took that first photograph, when you saw me, really saw me, at my most broken. You were never broken. You were grieving. There's a difference. Teach me the difference. I will. We'll teach each other. They kissed under the Santa Fe stars, two people who'd taken the long way to get to each other, who'd wandered and gotten lost and found themselves and each other in the process. When they pulled apart, Silas said, "Come on, let's go home." To Elena's. For tonight, but eventually maybe we'll find our own home, wherever that ends up being. I like the sound of that. They walked back through streets that smelled like piñon smoke and possibility. Back to Elena's house where she'd left the porch light on and a note on the kitchen table. I'm at book club. There's food in the fridge. Be happy, you two. You've earned it. They ate leftovers and looked through the photo book again, remembering. Then they went to bed, the same bed they'd shared months ago, but different now. Older, wiser, ready. They lay in the darkness, hands clasped between them. Declan, yeah, thank you for coming back. Thank you for being worth coming back to. Promise me something. Anything. Promise me we'll always take the long way. Even when the highway is faster. Even when it doesn't make sense. Promise me we'll always choose the scenic route. I promise, the scenic route. Always. They fell asleep like that together in Elena's guest room in Santa Fe at the beginning of everything. Outside, the desert night wrapped around the city like a blanket. Stars wheeled overhead, ancient and patient. And somewhere on a highway cutting through the darkness, another traveler headed toward another destination, following another road that might lead them home. 1 year later, Silas stood in front of the glass and wood structure he'd designed his first real commission. A library in downtown Santa Fe circular, and spiraling toward a glass ceiling with a reading room in the center, surrounded by trees and a fountain. Impractical, expensive, and absolutely perfect. Elena stood beside him, beaming. She would have loved it. I know. I designed it for her. And for yourself. And for myself. They watched as people entered and exited, arms full of books, faces full of purpose. The library had been open for a month, and already it was beloved, a space where stories and growing things coexisted exactly as Silas had imagined. A familiar Subaru pulled up to the curb. Declan got out, camera in hand, immediately starting to photograph the building from different angles. "Sorry I'm late," he called. "Got held up at the university." Declan had gotten into UNM's MFA program, was living in Albuquerque, an hour away, close enough to visit frequently. They were making it work, the distance, the different cities, the slow and careful building of a relationship that could last. "How'd the critique go?" Silas asked as Declan reached them. "Good, great actually. Professor Morrison loved the series I've been working on. The road trip series. The love story series. There's a difference." Declan showed them the latest Prince images from their original trip mixed with new ones from the past year. Santa Fe at sunset, Albuquerque in the snow, the two of them hiking in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, Silas at his drafting table lost in work. Moments of ordinary life made extraordinary through Declan's lens. "These are beautiful," Elena said. "When's the exhibition?" "Next month. And I want both of you there." Declan looked at Silas. "Especially you, since you're kind of the subject." "I thought the subject was love." "Same thing." They stood there, the three of them, watching people flow in and out of the library. After a while, Elena excused herself. Book club waited for no one, leaving Silas and Declan alone. "Want to see inside?" Silas asked. "Absolutely." They walked through Silas's creation, Declan photographing while Silas pointed out details, the way light fell through the glass ceiling, the spiral of shelves that encouraged exploration, the reading room's trees reaching toward the scaun. In the center beside the fountain, Silas stopped. "There's something I want to show you." He led Declan to a small plaque mounted on the wall. It read, "In memory of Sarah Chen, who taught her son to build spaces where people could grow." Below it in smaller letters, "Find someone who makes you brave enough to be afraid." Declan read it twice, then pulled Silas into a hug. "It's perfect. I couldn't have done it without you, without that road trip, without learning that the long way is sometimes the only way that matters." Speaking of the long way, Declan pulled back, looking nervous. "I've been thinking about something." "That sounds ominous." "It's not. I hope it's not. It's just, my lease in Albuquerque is up in 2 months, and I've been thinking about what comes next. And, and I was wondering if maybe you'd want to find a place together, here in Santa Fe. Nothing big, just somewhere we can both be, somewhere that's ours." Silas felt his heart race. They talked about this hypothetically, but hearing Declan actually propose it was different. Real, terrifying, and wonderful in equal measure. "Is it too fast?" Declan asked, misreading Silas's silence. "I know we said we'd take it slow." "It's been a year. That's not fast." "But yes. Yeah. Oh, and yes, I want to find a place with you. I want to wake up next to you every day instead of just weekends. I want to build a life with you, the messy and complicated kind that real people have." "Yes." Declan's smile could have powered a small city. "Yeah. Yeah." They kissed in the center of Silas's library, surrounded by books and trees and the sound of water falling. Kissed like they had 1,000 times before and would 1,000 times again. Kissed like two people who'd taken the long way home and finally arrived. When they pulled apart, Silas said, "Come on. Let's go look at rental listings. We have a place to find." "The scenic route?" "Always." They walked out of the library hand in hand into the Santa Fe afternoon. Behind them, people read and rested and found solace in Silas's creation. Ahead of them, a future stretched out like a highway, unknown, uncertain, full of possibility. And somewhere on a shelf in that circular library between poetry and philosophy sat a worn wooden box containing letters from a mother to her son. Letters about love and loss and the courage to keep living. Letters that had guided Silas through grief and torture, that had reminded him that the greatest gift you could give the dead was to fully embrace being alive. The box would stay there, a permanent installation available for anyone who needed to remember that grief and hope could coexist. That the long way home was sometimes the only way worth taking. And that sometimes the best journeys began with a broken down car and a stranger with a camera who saw you exactly as you were and chose to stay anyway. The end.